Clint, let's talk about your book. Your book, How Teams Triumph Managing by Commitment, emphasizes the power of conversation in project management. What makes real-time conversations more effective maybe than emails or digital tools, and how can project managers really use them to drive better outcomes on their projects?
I think the best example for this, let's start with a kid's game. So you think back to when you were a kid, you probably played the game telephone, depending on where you grew up. So I think over in Australia, they call it Chinese whisperers, but it's this idea that there's 5 or 6 kids.
Communication can make or break a project, yet 56% of project failures are caused by poor communication. In the AEC industry, where coordination between teams is critical, relying on emails and reports isn't enough. Real conversations drive real results. In this episode, I'm joined by Clint Padgett, President and CEO of Project Success, Inc., a project management expert with over 30 years of experience helping top companies improve project outcomes. Clint will reveal why conversation, not software or not status reports, is the most powerful tool in a project manager's toolkit. Stay tuned as we explore how to break down silos, align teams, and keep track of projects through the power of conversation. I'm your host, Anthony Pisano, and this is the AEC Project Management Podcast. Let's jump right in. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest onto the show for today, Clint Padgett, President and CEO of Project Success, Inc. Clint, welcome to the AEC Project Management Podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
And we're excited to have you, Clint. So maybe you can start off by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself, your career journey, what led you to project management and ultimately to your role as President and CEO of Project Success, Inc.
It's a rather circuitous route, but I did not grow up thinking that's what I wanted to do for a living. I'll tell you that for sure. I grew up, I knew I wanted to be an engineer ever since I was a kid. I wanted to be an electrical engineer from the time I was a very young child. I would go ride my bicycle to the library and check on books on robotics and lasers and, all these really cool electrical kind of things. And then I went in the Navy out of high school as an electrician's mate on an aircraft carrier and saving up money for college. And that gave me the practical application of electrical work so that I got accepted to Georgia Tech and got my double E degree from there. So then I had the theory on top of the practical applications. Went to work for Coca-Cola, and we had a project that went so badly that our engineering manager got fired. So we decided we'd better get better at project management and went to work, or I took a class from this company called Project Success. We actually started using that on our projects. We saw great results. In 94, the city of Atlanta got awarded the Olympic Games for the 96 Olympics, and I wanted to work on that project. So I knew that Project Success had gotten the contract to work with Coke on the Olympics. So I quit Coca-Cola on a Friday and went back on a Monday as a contractor working on the Olympic Games. And my thought was to do that for a couple of years and then go back, but I ended up liking the job so much that 31 years later, I'm still doing it.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, it's funny sometimes how we find our ways to different things in our careers, but I think oftentimes it does start as a kid with us having a thought in mind of something that we want to do, and in a lot of ways that sticks with us and evolves in different ways. So, Clint, let's talk about your book. Your book, How Teams Triumph Managing by Commitment, emphasizes the power of conversation in project management. What makes real-time conversations more effective maybe than emails or digital tools, and how can project managers really use them to drive better outcomes on their projects?
I think the best example for this, let's start with a kid's game. So you think back to when you were a kid, you probably played the game telephone, depending on where you grew up. So I think over in Australia, they call it Chinese whisperers, but it's this idea that there's 5 or 6 kids and one kid has a secret and they whisper the secret to the next kid and that kid whispers it on down the line. And of course, as you know, the fun of that game is that what the last person says is not remotely close to what the first person whispered. Unfortunately, that same dynamic plays out in the business world, where a leader will stand up and say, I have this what I think to be a very clear message that I give to the team. And then I'm quite surprised when what I thought was clear doesn't get executed the way that I wanted it. And what happens in both of those, the kids game and also in the business world, is each time someone tells us something, we hear that through the way we define terms, the way we were, our own biases, whether we're having a bad day that day it can influence the way that I hear something. So it's like the kids game is in the business world. There's no surprise that as you tell me your story, you tell me your what you thought was a clear message. I hear it through the way that I interpret words, through the way that I interpret things, and then twist it slightly to get my understanding around it. And when I tell the next person, they take it through their filters and their biases, and it gets twisted again. So it's really no surprise that the message gets mangled as it moves from person to person through the organization or in that game of telephone. What would make both situations better is if each person could ask clarifying questions. And that's what we do when we have a conversation and we ask questions. We say, well, what about this? What about that? What do you mean by this word? So if you tell me, Clint, turn left, I could say, okay, you mean left at the next intersection, the next traffic light, or this driveway right here? Which left do you mean? And so by asking these clarifying questions, the message will stay consistent throughout as it moves from person to person through the organization. Or in the game of telephone, you'll get the secret passed through correctly.
Yeah, that's interesting. I really like the idea of clarifying. I learned a lot about that when I went to executive coaching school and have used some of that in my experience. But even day to day, like for example, last night I'm sitting on the couch, I was watching the basketball games, and my wife says to me, "Where were the games Friday night?" Now, my daughter just had a soccer game. I'm watching the basketball games, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what game she's talking about. So I ask her, what games? And of course, she's like, "Well, what do you mean? You're watching the game?" But my point being is that a lot of times I think in projects, I mean, these are $1 million projects with big decisions and change orders and scope creep and all kinds of things that could go wrong. And so if we don't take the time to clarify and make sure that we're really clear on what people are saying, obviously the outcomes can be catastrophic depending on the types of things that we're dealing with, which is why in project management this is so important. And I think really it's not something people think about, because when we read the project management books, Clint, and we go to the trainings, it is more scoping and scheduling and budgeting and maybe not so much on conversation. So I'm interested, just from your own experience, how can project managers do more of this, right? How can we have more conversations?
I think, this is interesting to me as well, because I've been doing this for a job for a really long time. And even pre-pandemic, it was an issue. People would not get out of their desk and go down the hallway and talk to a colleague. They'd simply email them. And now, of course, with the proliferation of all the technical tools we have, it's Slack and Jira, and of course, Zoom, all the different video conferencing technologies we have today, it just got exacerbated through the pandemic. People work remotely. And to me, it's about being intentional and saying, I know that the way I look at it is, if it's going to take me 5 or 6 emails back and forth, why not just pick up the phone? Or if I'm in the same office, get out of my chair and go sit and talk to them just for 2 seconds. Say, hey man, here's what I did. Is this what you wanted? And I think there's a reason why people tend not to do that. I mean, you should be intentional and you should have the conversations. But if I ask myself, why are people so wired to send an email or post something on Slack or Jira, or, send a text message? Why is that? And I believe as human beings, we have this innate burning desire to want to check things off of our to-do list. And the quickest way that I could check something on my to-do list is if I send you a one-way message saying it's done, and I hope I never hear from you again, because then I could say to myself, hey, I didn't hear anything back. It must be good. But if I picked up the phone and I called you and said, hey, here's what I did. Is this what you actually wanted? Then what I might find out is I didn't do what you wanted. And now through this conversation, I have more work on my to-do list, which I don't really want to do. But that's the reality of the situation. Is I should have asked you that question. I should have said, does this meet your expectations? And not relied on the one-way communication. So have those conversations. Don't rely on the technology. The technology is great and we should definitely use it. If we're in different geographic locations, then yeah, let's jump on a Zoom call. And I prefer, to me, it's kind of a hierarchy, right? So text messages, emails, those work better, I think, for summaries of conversation we just had, yes, no questions that, or answer questions that have yes, no answers. And then the next step up would be a phone conversation, because at least I can hear your voice, but I don't really get the physical context of what I don't see your face. I don't get the visual cues that I would get through a Zoom call or some kind of a, Teams call. But there's still nothing better than, if it's possible, just a face-to-face conversation. And those are probably better off for planning sessions and deep conversations, but don't be afraid to have the conversation. Take the extra time, have the conversation. And yeah, you may walk away with something else on your to-do list, but it's going to make the project more successful.
Yeah, I think that's great. Something that we recently implemented here at EMI at the beginning of this year was doing these daily huddles. And I found that they've been game changers, because to your point, if I can get on the phone with people for 15 minutes every morning and flush out a lot of things that I'm not sure about, I'm unclear about, something they need from me, and just get that taken care of. And there is the back and forth, which you don't have, like you said, on an asynchronous messaging system. I can really get things to completion and then go on and tackle some of my own tasks. And we found it to be really game changing. The other thing that I like about it a lot is we have like a standing agenda that's like a shared document. And if I think of something during the day for Betty or for Michelle, I type it in the document. And when we meet the next morning, we go through everything. And so I think if you look for ways on your projects, to Clint's point, where you can actually engage with people and understand whether or not you've brought it to completion, or maybe it's only 75% completion and you still have a couple things you have to do, that could be a big game changer. And honestly, I think it saves you time in the long run because it avoids a lot of back and forth on the messaging system that you don't have to worry about.
For sure. Yeah, I wanted to if I can, let me tag team on that a little bit. So I think a couple of things come to mind. As I was saying, one of the things people like to do is they like to have these one-way communications, get it off their plate. And you were making up an excellent point there, because I've seen emails go back and forth, and I finally, even on my own team, and I sent an email back. I said, y'all stop, have a phone conference, just 5 minutes, just talk. You will get all your questions answered. It won't be any of this back and forth. And I can see one of you's getting irritated. Just stop, just pick up the phone, have a conversation, solve this problem. Right. So that's one thing is to your point, don't be inefficient. You may think it's more efficient to fire up that email, but people can't see tone in an email. The other thing I wanted to mention is the reason that we like face-to-face in person as much as possible. And we work on some really big projects. We do big construction projects. I just finished the last 3 weeks we spent working on the Coca-Cola FIFA World Cup 2026 project to get them ready to go for FIFA next year. So these are pretty massive projects. And what we find is you can work remotely. I could do 2-year project remote. If the first week we are face-to-face, because over this face-to-face conversation, I'm going to learn more about you. And it's going to sound really weird coming from somebody that's an engineer, but I'm going to make some kind of a physical, a mental connection with you. I'm going to convert you from an email address to which I have no accountability to somebody that I have a connection with. Maybe you have your kids, my kids' age, or they play the same sports, or there'll be something about you that begins to resonate with me, and I'll form some kind of a connection. And we know that happens. I've seen it happen for 30 plus years. Is if we can get in a room just for a few days, a week, and have these conversations about the project work, we'll actually form bonds that allow me to go remote and then still have accountability back and forth. Now, what I find is also interesting is I was talking to Dr. Sherry Turkle from MIT, who wrote a book. I think it's I can't remember the name right off the top of my head, but she's written 3 New York Times bestsellers. She's a brilliant person. She's a psychologist. And in her book I was interviewing her on, it was talking about a study they'd done in Japan. And I don't know how they did this. It's fascinating, but they were able to figure out that when you're face to face with somebody, you're making eye contact. There's a chemical connection that happens when you do that, when you make eye to eye contact. And she's telling me this story. I asked her about it during the interview. She's telling me the story. She says, like, Clint, right now, to make you think I'm making eye to eye contact, I'm looking directly into my camera. So you think I'm looking right at you. She said, but you're down here and I can't see you at all. So we're not really making that connection that's so important. So I'm a big fan of face-to-face. Even in Zoom era, there's still something lost. If you can get face-to-face, ideal, especially for those initial sessions. If you're going to run your project remotely, the bonds you can form early on will allow you to do that. And that's really about accountability.
That's great. And I think the book you might have been referencing is Reclaiming Conversations,
That's
the
it.
Power of Talk in a Digital Age. Yeah.
She's amazing.
Looks good. Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think everything you're saying is really important. In fact, one of the things that we did last year here at EMI is we got a physical headquarters. And I remember, because we've been remote for our existence, and I remember a lot of people telling me, you don't need a physical headquarters, you're wasting money. And what I do now is we bring all of our team members in maybe once a quarter, and we sit around the conference room, we go out together, we get some things, we talk about some projects. And to your point, for the months after that, the 3 months after that, until we meet again, you're a lot more engaged with each other. You're on the same wavelength, and we've seen a lot of success. And the ideas we come up when we're together in a conference room on a whiteboard for 1 week aren't ideas that I think we come up with, going remote. So I think that there are a lot of benefits if you can mix it up a little bit. Even if you are a fully remote company, get together once in a while. You're going to see results from that.
I think you're perfectly. We have the same situation. We have brick and mortar as well. We've had it for the whole time that we've been around. And there are times we only meet once a year as a team because my team is spread across the country. and sometimes across the world. And we still bring them back once a year, at least once a year, to have a physical in-person 2-day session, just so we can all remind each other who we are. I like to joke, just remember that your check doesn't come from the client you're working at. It comes from PSI. So make sure you're thinking about who you actually work for. But it's about those bonds that and to your point, people would say, well, yeah, but can't you just do all that whiteboarding stuff through Mural or whatever? And the problem with that is people don't really pay attention, right? If I'm remote, and maybe some people do, I shouldn't throw everybody in the same box, but I see a lot of times where people are not, they say they're engaged, but they're really not, because you ask them a question and they say, wait, what? So they really weren't paying attention. And you have to worry about the distractions of that client fire they're trying to put out while they're also, somewhat paying attention to the whiteboard. But when they're in the room, you're looking right at them. There's nowhere to hide. They're engaged, fully on board, feet on the ground right there, which is what you want.
Yeah, and I would say too, ever since COVID, I feel like people really crave, personal interaction, because for so long we didn't have it. And now it's like, I know our team members are like, oh, we're going to get together. That's great. Let's get together. So I think there's a lot to that for sure. And so, Clint, the next thing I want to kind of bounce off you here is what we deal with in project management that's very tricky is difficult conversations, right? Whether it's about scope creep, something happened on a project that we have to bring to our client's attention and it's a tough conversation. How can project managers handle these difficult conversations, whether they're with clients or contractors or team members, and still try to keep their projects on track?
I think two different things come up here in my mind. So one is, you mentioned scope creep. And, scope creep can come from a couple of places. The one most people think about is scope creep that comes from the customer, where the customer wants a new feature or a new function or wants something different, right? And I'm actually okay with scope creep from the customer, as long as the conversation can happen when we say, you want a new feature? I understand why you want that. It makes perfect sense. That's not what we talked about originally. So to add that extra feature, it's going to take us another 4 weeks, another $20,000.
Right.
That dialogue has to take place. I'm also a big believer that customers aren't stupid, and they may ask you to do something they know can't be done, hoping it can be done. It's your job or my job to push back and go, look, we can definitely do that. But I know that you wanted to hit this Q1 delivery date, and everything we've been working for is to get to that Q1 delivery date. So if you want Q1, we can do it without this feature. If you want this feature and it has to be before we deliver the whole thing, we can't phase it, then here's what it's going to take, or we need to drop something else we've been doing and help us decide, customer, about what it is. So to me, it's all about having fact-based information and not just my gut says we should do this. If you can have a plan that shows why something can or can't be done, and be ready to answer the questions about what if we add money or resources, could we solve it? If you have those conversations, I think the customer will be willing to accept the less than stellar news of what they wanted. Now, with scope creep, it's also quite interesting, because I would argue there's another more dangerous group that contributes to scope creep as well. And that's the third group you mentioned when you asked the question, and that's team members. Team members can contribute to scope creep. And the reason I say they're more dangerous is because each team member says, now that we're doing this, fixing this one thing over here, that's going to give us access to go fix this other thing over there that's been a problem for years. But the problem is, fixing that thing over there has nothing to do with this project for this customer. And what you're doing is you're saying, well, while the hood is up, let me go ahead and do that. And the argument I would make against that is, I would say, and this is going to sound pretty forceful, but I would say you're stealing from the project, because what you're doing, it's like taking your car to the dealership and saying, I want to get the oil changed. And you come back that afternoon and you have a bill for $1,400. And I know we have inflation, but that's ridiculous, right? So you start looking at the invoice and it says, I changed all your belts, I changed all the fluids, I changed your wipers, I did all this work. And you say, wait, what is this? I just wanted the oil changed. And the guy looks at you and says, well, the hood was up. So I just took care of everything while the hood was up. And you have to get that stuff done eventually anyway. And you're saying, no, I was going to sell my car tomorrow. I just needed to have the oil changed to keep the records up. No. And so when you make all these changes, it is always, the people's heart's always in the right place. Nobody ever does it for malicious purposes. It really would make the company better overall. But for that customer at that moment, it's the wrong thing to do. So it's all about making sure you stay focused. And so I think scope creep can come from two places. I believe the customer has every right to ask for more, as long as the team has the same right to negotiate for a longer duration and more money. And just be careful that your team members aren't throwing things that really don't help you be successful on the project.
Yeah, I love those. Those are very practical approaches to it, especially that first one. I think a lot of our listeners run into that where their client is asking them for more and they have to be firm, like you said, and push back a little bit and let them know, like, hey, you want us to finish by June 1st. Well, you can't add this into the mix and get done by June 1st, type of thing. One of the things that we tell our training participants a lot is when you start your project, if you have a good feel for what the critical path is on your schedule and your clients have some things on that critical path, you should let them know, right? Like, listen, we can get this permit application in for you, but remember, you have to approve it, get us a check and all that stuff. If you don't, you're on the critical path. So you're pushing that thing over the limit if we don't. And I think things like that and phrases like that will get them to understand how they're also part of the equation of getting this done on time.
Yeah, sometimes I'll hear contractors or vendors say, "Well, I don't really want to do the planning piece because they're going to use it to hold me accountable." And to you said it perfectly. I don't think I can say it any better. But it's basically about understanding what are the connection points back to the customer, and if you could show them, and I love critical path. I live that stuff every day. But if you can show them, hey, if every day you're late on your decision delays my ability to do my work, and therefore delays
Right.
the launch date or the permit or whatever that thing is, if you can show them that day to day reaction, which we know is called the critical path, and they're going to listen. They're going to say, okay, I really need to make this decision. On my first book, when I was writing it, I would get these arbitrary deadlines from the publisher, and it didn't really mean anything to me because it was their deadline, not my deadline. But if they had said, hey, Clint, if you want to launch by this date, this is a decision. I need this chapter by this date, or we're not going to make that. Then okay, now I understand, and I'll
Right.
work towards it. But you have to have that communication so we understand what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. Now, undoubtedly, Clint, in the timeline of any project, I mean, you and I and engineering companies work on mega projects. So there's going to be communication breakdowns throughout these projects, right? And project managers are going to deal with this all the time. As a project manager, when you do have a communication breakdown on a project, whether it's with the client or the public or a stakeholder or your team member, like you said before, what are some things that a PM can do in a situation like that to kind of, get things back on track, kind of keep things going in the face of that communication breakdown?
So for me, the first thing is I'm always about, okay, let's fix the problem first. And the second thing is let's figure out what happened so we don't make that mistake again. So if there's a communication breakdown, okay, what is the right thing to do? What do we got to do to get back on track? Have those conversations and then do a post-mortem on the activity and say, okay, what happened here? Why did we get here? Was there a communication that got caught in spam? Was it something we misunderstood because we didn't have that conversation? So to me, the first thing is just get it back on track. And we do that through a conversation with our team. Hey, here's what happened. We're in the ditch. What are we going to do as a team to get this thing back out of the ditch and get the project headed back in the right direction? What impact is that going to have on our timeline? Are we still going to be able to deliver on time? If not, what are the things on the critical path we can look at doing that will get us back on get us back on track? And then once I know that, then I can go back and say, how did this happen? And maybe maybe it was a missed conversation with the customer, or maybe the team didn't quite understand, which brings up a slightly different topic that I want to throw in, which is, in project work, you have scope. We've been talking a lot about scope, which are the things we actually have to go produce and do. But the scope is what you do to achieve the objective, right? Or the objectives of your project. And to me, it's if I know why, which is the objective, if I know why you want to do something, I have a much higher likelihood of being successful in helping you get there than if you just tell me, Clint, turn left, I'm going to turn left. But if you say, Clint, I want to turn left because I think it's the shortest way to the airport and I have a flight to catch, I might say, oh, well, actually, there's a detour around on left. I just went that way yesterday. If you're trying to get to the airport as fast as possible, the actual best way to do that is by turning right, and then eventually we'll make a left. So if I know why we want to do something, that's going to help me do things the right way. And it probably helps us also resolve some of the communication issues because I know exactly what we're trying to accomplish.
I really like that. And I think that the time on a project to do that is in that, that kickoff meeting, those planning stages where you can really understand the why behind the client. If they want to do something a certain way, or they're trying to do something that maybe you don't 100% agree with, or you're kind of not sure why they want to do it that way, really understanding the project from the very beginning stages, I think to Clint's point, can maybe help you change it. Oh, well, if that's what you want to do, we should be doing it this way, or we should be using this material, or, we should be doing construction in this time of the year in this location, or whatever the case may be. So I think having that context can really help to alleviate communication breakdown. And quite frankly, it's going to show your clients that you're a really good project manager because you're trying to get to the bottom of the project and their goals and figuring out the absolute best way to deliver it for them, which is what we should be doing.
Yeah, I would argue that we don't get to change the why, but we can certainly change the what. How, what do we need to do to achieve that why? And so they may think they want X, Y, and Z. But if you say, well, what are you trying to achieve? What is the objective? If you understand that, then you might say, okay, actually X, Y, and Z is not going to really get you there. It'll get you close. But if we do A, B, and C instead, that's going to get you where you want to be. And so I saw another thing I was reading once where it talked, I think it was GE did an acquisition, and they were interviewing some of the people on the shop floor, and the guy raised his hand and he says, you pay for our hands. You could have our hearts and heads for free. So ask me questions. I'm the one working on the shop floor. I'm the one in this every day. I'm the one that could best tell you how to do it better. Right? I can't tell you the strategy, but I could tell you how to make this piece work better, faster, more efficiently, whatever, if you simply ask the question.
Yeah. Sometimes we just, we have people right in front of us that we can get game-changing information for our projects, and we just don't take advantage of it. And that's a good thing to remember. All right, Clint, the final question I have for you, we call it the PM pitfalls question. What would you say are one of the biggest pitfalls that you see project managers kind of fall into on their projects? And how would you recommend that they avoid it or maybe minimize it on their projects?
Boy, there's so many I could pick from, but I think the one that I would go after is, especially if they're newer newer project managers, they have this, and particularly if they don't really enjoy planning. So they say, I hated planning when I was a team member. Let me help these guys out. I know what they're doing. I'm just going to build a plan for them, save them that time. And then I know the sequence. I'll put it in the right order, and I know about how long it should take. I'm just going to save them the time, and I'll build a plan, and now I'll socialize it, right? I'll send it around. The problem is that nobody ever reads it, right? When you send it out in an email to say, and you say, please review this. They're like, no, they don't. They got 5 other things on their plate. And the biggest thing is you don't have the accountability. I was lucky enough to work on the FIFA World Cup in Brazil in 2014. And I was on that project off and on for 2 years, 2 major planning sessions and a few updates along the way. So I knew the team, I knew the process, I knew the people. And then 2016 came around and we had the Olympics in Brazil, in Rio for 2016. Same basic group, not exactly the same, but a majority of the team were the same country. And having planned all the Olympics for Coke since 1994, I know better than anybody in the world how this works. So I could have gone off on my own and built a project plan for the 2016 Olympics in Rio based on my overall knowledge of Olympics and my specific knowledge of Brazil. But I didn't do that. And that's because the team would have had no accountability. That would have always been Clint's project and not their project. And the end result is you want the team to build their plan for their project, because they're the ones executing. So if I'm over here in a silo, making it saving the team time, in air quotes, in case you're listening, saving the team time, or really not, because now what's going to happen, I'm going to publish a schedule that nobody buys into, nobody believes, and they make a mockery of it. They say, well, he must have used random number generators to pick the durations because they're not remotely close to what I would actually need to take. So I would say don't take that shortcut, because it ends up not being a shortcut. It makes your project a disaster. Involve the team, have them build their plan for their project.
That's great. All right. Well, he is Clint Padgett, President and CEO of Project Success, Inc. The website for Project Success, Inc. is projectsuccess.com. And then also his book is How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment. And you can find the book, I believe, on Amazon. Is that correct, Clint?
Correct. Yep.
You can find it on Amazon. And Clint, I want to say, first of all, thank you for your service to our country. And thank you for spending some time with us on the podcast today. We really appreciate everything you have to offer.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Clint. He's had a lot of experience managing projects, big projects. And I think the conversations and the communication strategies that he shared can be invaluable to your projects, and I hope you can implement them. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better project managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.